Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Movies from the Core. So, I decided to review this movie, Eddie and the Cruisers. It's PG, came out in 1983, it's an hour and 35 minutes. And one of the biggest things that I love about 80s movies is within the poster, it gives you a good idea of what you're going to be getting. You've seen it with plenty of the John Hughes films. You've seen it with Top Gun. And now you see it clear as day with Eddie and the Cruisers. Now, before I get into the premise of this film, I just need you all to know that this is one of the best films that I've watched in a long time. And I don't know if it's just because it was one of the last movies I watched with my father before he passed away, or if I just love the story. But let's dive into it. So, Eddie and the Cruisers is about Eddie Wilson, who's played by Michael Parra, who in 1964, like it says, he had it all. He was, he was the voice you wanted to hear on your radio. He was the guy that you wanted. And he, like the poster says, he had it all. And, he ends up committing suicide. Just a year, well, actually, in the film, he blows up, like, the band goes, nationwide, I think, in 62 or 63, and then in 64, he commits suicide. So, the whole movie starts off with giving us a little idea of who Eddie and the Cruisers are. And they end up, it kind of gets centered around Maggie Foley, who's a reporter. She's played by Ellen Barkin. And she's trying to figure out a way to, I guess, revive Eddie and the Cruisers and figure out what really happened back then. Because the night that he committed suicide, there was he left the recording studio. There was a giant scene. So she's like, well, let's play it off as, what if he didn't die? Because they never found his body. What if he survived and he just wanted to get away from everything? So Maggie ends up trying to connect with all of the old band members. The first person that she contacts is Frank Ridgway, who's played by Tom Berenger. And he was the piano guy, and all he wanted to do, they called him, I think it was the Music Man. And, she's trying to figure out what really happened that night. And Frank won't give anything away. So then she decides to go out and talk to their manager, Doc Robbins, who's played by Joe Pantoliano. And he won't give anything. But then at the same time, they find out that the album they were doing back then, Season in Hell, the master tapes are gone. So they're trying to figure out who stole the tapes. Maybe Eddie stole the tapes. Maybe, it's like there's so many if, ands, or buts about it. So we keep on getting flashbacks of what really happened back then as we go, through with the story. And we find out that back then Eddie had a girl named Joanne, who's played by Helen Schneider, and Frank was in love with her. And Eddie didn't appreciate it, but Eddie loved the music more than he loved Joanne. And so, a lot of things happen. We end up even getting introduced to Eddie's best friend and frontman, Sal Amato, who's played by Matthew Lawrence. And we just, everything keeps on going back and forth as to who has the tapes and who's trashing their apartments and, trying to get a real answer of what actually happened that night. Now, IMDb gave it a 6.9 out of 10, but I give it a 5 out of 5 because it kind of just, it hits to home because, my parents were in a band, and that's what their life was, the band. And that's kind of what it is in this film. Like, their life is the band. And I don't know, it kind of just pulls at your heartstrings a little bit, along with being able to listen to some pretty good tunes. Now, excuse me, all the music that is played during, like, for the whole soundtrack was actually performed by John Cafferty and the Beaver Brown Band. So, if you like them, then you'll like this movie. Now, sadly, there is nowhere you can watch this film. But if you can find a way to watch it, I highly suggest you do, whether it's even just going out and buying it, because it is well worth the watch. But let me know.